My name is Nikki Hamblin. I'm an Olympian and a member of the ITA Education team. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the third ITA Monthly Educational Webinar of 2023. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are in the world. Before I introduce the topic in more detail and our panelists, please allow me to do some housekeeping. We are delivering this webinar in 6 languages. On your Zoom menu, you should see a button called Interpretation. By clicking on this icon, you can select a channel with your preferred language. I will be presenting this session in English, but you can also listen to the audio in Arabic, Mandarin Chinese, French, Russian, or Spanish. Today's webinar is part of our educational monthly series that are publicly available and designed to tackle key anti-doping topics and to raise clean sport awareness. As for all our sessions, it goes without saying that while we encourage debate, interaction, and questions, we do not tolerate any kind of aggressive behaviour or abusive or racist language. We trust you will join us in the spirit of fairness, respect, and integrity. Some other housekeeping points. Please do use the chat function to tell us a little bit about yourself. For example, the sport you are representing. And I will just give a pause to see if anyone wants to say hello in the chat. Hello, we've got Chai Meng Long from Malaysia Fencing. Great to have you with us today. Someone from Korea. Awesome, great to have you. So also a reminder that you can use the Q&A function to ask a question on this topic to one of our expert panelists. And we will leave some time at the end of the session for these. And finally, please note that we do record all our webinars so we can make them available on our website and YouTube channel for those who are not able to attend the live session. As always, it is my pleasure to give a shout out to our official presenting partner, Inform Sport. Their investment allows us to deliver the webinar program free of charge in 6 different languages. Inform Sport is a global certification program for supplements that batch test products for substances prohibited in sport. As supplement contamination continues to be one of the leading causes of inadvertent doping, we encourage all athletes and support personnel to check all products before use at sport.wetestyoutrust.com. The ITA is proud to be recognised by UNESCO as a leading international organisation for the delivery of anti-doping programs. And this educational webinar is delivered with the support of the UNESCO International Convention Against Doping in Sport. Today's webinar is part 2 of our 2-part webinar series in which we are looking at the consequences of doping, delivered in collaboration with the University of Birmingham. Today, in part 2, we will focus on the effects of doping on others. Part 1, which was delivered in February, was the impact of doping on emotions. And if you did miss part 1, it is available for you to view on the ITA Athlete Hub. These 2 webinars are adapted from the anti-doping education program developed by Professor Maria Cavasanu and her team, which was funded by the International Olympic Committee. To take a look at the impact of doping on others, I am joined today by 2 great panelists. I would like to invite Phil and Christine to turn on their cameras and offer them a warm welcome. So firstly, I would like to reintroduce Dr. Philip Hurst, as some of you may have met him last month. So Phil is a senior lecturer in sport and exercise psychology at Canterbury Christchurch University. He competed as a middle distance runner for Great Britain and has been working as an anti-doping educator for UK Athletics since 2016. In 2018, he helped create, deliver, and evaluate anti-doping education interventions commissioned by both the World Anti-Doping Agency and the International Olympic Committee. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you, Nikki. Really good to be back and looking forward to going through the next session.
Good to have you with us, Phil. So next, I would like to introduce Christine Girard. So Christine is a two-time Olympian and an Olympic bronze and gold medalist. She was a board member of the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport for 3.5 years and is currently an ITA Education Ambassador and an International Weightlifting Anti-Doping Commission member. Christine has most recently been appointed Team Canada's chef de mission for the Santiago 2023 Pan American Games. So welcome, Christine, and thank you so much for fitting us into your very busy schedule.
It's a pleasure to be here. I always love getting involved in promoting clean sports, so it's a real pleasure, and thank you everybody for being here.
So as mentioned earlier, we will leave some time at the end of the session for questions from you. So if you would like to ask Phil or Christine anything related to today's topic, please pop the questions in the Q&A box. And just as a reminder, this session is designed to be interactive, so I do encourage you to participate through the chat box and the polls as much as you can during this hour. So, Phil, perhaps over to you to give an overview of today's session, what we're going to do, what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, perfect. So we often are aware or are educated about the health consequences associated with the use of banned substances. This session is looking at the consequences of doping for others. So what we recognize from the research that we've conducted is that athletes may dope but not consider the effects they may have for other competitors, their family members, and also their teammates. So what we are trying to do today is to introduce you to the consequences this can have for these three groups in particular. And I think this leads on to our first video. Yeah, perfect. So with this video that we're about to watch, we created it to highlight some of the issues that athletes may experience from the retrospective effects of doping samples. So what I'd like to do is watch this video of Charlie, is what his story is going to highlight. And I want you to consider the effect doping has on his career. So it's a couple of minutes long. Have a watch and see what you think.
Say hello to Charlie. Charlie is an athlete that won bronze by 1/100th of a second at the Olympic Games, the slimmest of margins. Charlie was very, very proud to be stood on the podium in the Olympic Stadium receiving his medal. Now, since achieving this bronze medal at the Olympics, Charlie was asked to appear on TV shows and was often asked to be a guest speaker around the world. With so much publicity, Charlie was offered a new sponsorship with extra incentives. Charlie went into the next season confident of even better things. And Charlie built on his season and performed even better than last, winning more and more medals. Charlie retired 4 years later, where he became a BBC Sports presenter. Charlie is an Olympic medalist. But what if Charlie didn't win that bronze medal? Imagine if Charlie lost bronze by 1/100th of a second. Charlie didn't get a chance to stand on the podium. He didn't have anyone offering him TV appearances or guest speaking duties. In fact, for not gaining a medal at the Olympics, his sponsor did not believe he had gained a significant return in their investment and decided to part ways. Charlie went into the next season anxious and feeling the pressure to perform. Without sponsorship, Charlie had to get a part-time job to help pay for his training, his physio, and his travel expenses. With so much extra work in his life, Charlie was stressed and working so hard, he ended up getting injured. Charlie missed the season through injury and never returned to full fitness. He eventually retired after constantly struggling to make it back. A few months after he retired, a new story reported that the athlete that beat him by 1/100th of a second to bronze was doping. Charlie was cheated out of his bronze medal, and although he received it months later, it wasn't the same. Now imagine, if Charlie had received his bronze medal at the right time and was not beaten by someone who was doping, would his career have been any different?
Okay, so I hope that highlights the content that we're going to go through today, the differences in an athlete's career and how a person that dopes could potentially take away a lot of opportunities. It can have a significant implication on their mental health. They're trying to push their boundaries as much as they can and potentially going over the limits because they didn't quite get there the first time. So what we'd like to do is go to the next slide. Nikki, if we can have our, I think you're going to introduce the poll.
Yeah, sure. So now we would like to ask you in the audience to get involved, and this is through the poll question. So hopefully we can launch the poll. And please do remember that your responses are completely anonymous, so please do get involved. And the question is, do you know or have you heard of anyone, so for example in the news, that has had an experience like Charlie's, where they've been negatively affected by another athlete who has doped? And the possible answers are yes, no, or I'm not sure. And so I think those three options should cover every participant here. So it would be great if we could get you all involved in answering. So I'm probably not going to ask this question to Christine, but Phil, what would you answer? How would you answer this question?
Yeah, I not personally, I don't know anybody, but I think what's been quite obvious, or what's come out in the news quite a bit over the last 5 years, is a number of athletes who have been given a medal maybe 5 years, 6 years, even up to 10 years later because of someone else who had doped. What about yourself, Nikki?
Yeah, I mean, same as you. We hear a lot of stories in the news. I personally know some athletes. So, for example, Valerie Adams. She was subsequently awarded an Olympic gold medal after initially getting the silver medal. And I guess being aware and seeing her experience of that, you know, it's pretty hard to see an athlete who gives it everything and then doesn't quite end up getting what they end up deserving.
Yeah.
But maybe now we will close the poll because we have 70% of you have participated and 60% of you have said that yes, you do know or you have heard of someone. Few of you don't, and some of you aren't sure. But anyway, I think that, so now we can maybe go to Christine. And she is someone who, well, I didn't ask this question to her because she has had this experience where she has experienced the consequences of doping firsthand, having been reallocated 2 Olympic medals from both Beijing and London. And the Olympic medal reallocation process is all about ensuring that clean athletes do receive their deserved rewards. And so I guess just to give you a bit of background to this process, so medal reallocation obviously has to be approved. There is quite a long, lengthy process to go through. And then the athlete gets to, I guess, choose how they want to receive their medal. So Phil, I know you do have some questions for Christine to understand more about this experience that she's had in sport and about her medal reallocations as well.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this. We're so fortunate to have you here, Christine. So thank you so much for being here. I would just like to start potentially at the beginning of your Olympic career. So what was it like? Tell me the feeling of the work that you put in leading up to your first Olympics and what it meant to, achieve such an amazing feat of coming fourth at your first Olympics.
Yeah, well, it was definitely challenging. Obviously, I think all sport are weightlifting has been a targeted sport for a very long time. So we had a lot of testing on the way to the Olympics. When I competed at the first World Senior for me, that's when I realized that there was a big variation in different countries. And even though I was the best in Canada, I was definitely not the best in the world. So it was really eye-opening for me, but it made me work even harder. And in Beijing, it was great to be there. To qualify for the Olympics was such a big dream come true. I didn't really believe in my chance of medal at that time. So when I finished fourth, 3 kilos away, it's a Chihuahua weight, right? Like finish a Chihuahua away from the podium. It was definitely exciting, but heartbreaking at the same time.
Oh, I could imagine. So in terms of the work to get there, was that a lifelong dream for yourself to be able to get to the Olympics?
Yeah, it was a full-time job, right? I was at school part-time, but the rest of my life was all about training and being the best I could. So I trained 8 times a week, twice a day, physio massage. Everything I ate was calculated. Everything I did was calculated. All my decision was based on, will that make me a better athlete? If the answer is yes, I'm doing it. If the answer is no, I'm passing. So it was definitely a lot of dedication, I guess.
And I suppose a fundamental to that is the importance of competing clean. Was that sort of fundamental to you as well?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm from a country that we promote clean sport a lot, right? I started to be tested, I was 14, and I had no idea what that was. So that's when I discovered what was clean sport and the importance of it. So for me, I grew into this, right? It was part of the culture in my sport and in my country. And it was really important for me to always push my limit while staying true to myself and true to my values. So yes, it was a lot of time, it was a lot of work, but it was so important for me to do it the right way. And luckily, it was important for my entourage as well, right? Like my family, my coaches. I never was offered anything, and it was never a question for me.
No, perfect. I might put you on the spot with this question. Do you know what your values are? You say, staying true to your values. Did you list a couple of those?
Well, health is a very important one, right? Like when we're athletes, the first thing that gets us moving when we start a sport is because we want to be more healthy and have a good relationship and build up our confidence. All of that is what guided me to stay true to myself and true to my values, right? Like, which is not cheating and being have integrity and being able to stay me, because as we know, people who take drugs, they sometimes not become themselves, right? Like they change, and I really wanted to stay who I was, so and to promote my health.
Amazing. So you finished fourth in your first games, which I think is so amazing. I didn't even get to the Olympics, so I can't imagine the talent, the effort you got in to get there. Describe that next 4-year cycle then. So obviously you're going for the Olympics in 2012. Talk me through the transition and what you had to do to get there.
It was actually quite a hard. Fourth place is a very difficult one to get. I came back in my country and people were stopping me on the road to say, hey, you're almost good. And this was really difficult because I did a technical error that made me miss my last lift that would have given me a bronze medal. So I had to deal with that fail. And people just kept reminding me it wasn't bad of their, like it wasn't bad intention, but it was always telling me that I failed. And that dealing with that emotion was really difficult, and I ended up doing a depression. And it was really hard to keep training and to just come back of that. So luckily for me, my country believed in me, and they put some money available for me so I could not have to work. But I didn't have enough money to pay for, because I didn't have any sponsor, right? I wasn't a medalist. So I didn't have extra visibility, extra sponsors. I was really just the bare minimum. So I ended up not being able to pay for a coach. So I coached myself. I trained in a carport with my dog. I was really alone in those 4 years. It was quite of a challenge to get to London. But I decided to do it, I think partly because of the help of my entourage, but also because I felt like I could be the first female in my country to have a medal at the Olympics. And I wanted to open the door for other little girls to be able to believe in their dreams, right? So that's what kept me going till London. But those 4 years was quite of a challenge.
It really does sound so hard. So, you know, just to list those people that, you know, you have the organization who are giving you, you know, the support for your training, your family, were they quite important in terms of how you were able to achieve your dream of medaling at the next Olympics?
Yeah, definitely. Well, because I wasn't working, I had just the bare minimum to not have to work, but we were living in my in-laws' second house, so we had like cheap rent for me to afford being able to do that. We had my parents helping and supporting me. My parents actually came across Canada to come help me build a gym in my carport so I could actually train from there. They packed their tools and they moved like they came 6-hour flight just to help me with that. And my husband was definitely helping a lot. He was part of my coach team, and he was a big reason why I was able to get to London. So definitely important. And what's even more important is they all encouraged me while staying true to myself again, right? Like no one put any pressure in performing. They all wanted me to reach my dream and do it the right way so I could be proud of it.
No, I love that. And I think it's so important you mentioned the word team. You know, weightlifting is an individual sport, but there's nothing individual about it really, is there? You have so many people there around you. So incredible to hear that you got to the London 2012 Games. You win an Olympic bronze medal, the first for your country. Tell me what that was like.
It was amazing. I could not believe, I actually got injured a week before I competed. So I completely blanked my ranking when I competed. I was like, I don't even think about it because competing with an injured shoulder is hard enough. Like that's what I'm doing. Do the best I can with what I have. That's always been my mantra. So when I finished competing and I turned around with my last lift and my husband showed me 3-finger, and I was like, oh my gosh, I could not believe that I achieved my dream. It was such an important moment for me, for my team, for my family, for my friends, but also I think for my country, right? Like weightlifting is perceived as a man's sport. And so like to be a female and perform in that and whilst being me and being like promoting those values, it was really really good, I think, for the whole country.
Absolutely incredible. So happy for you for that. And then when it comes, I suppose, in 2016 then, so you'd retired. It's what yeah, did you retire?
Yeah, I had my first son in 2014. I competed once after and I'm like, well, I think I'm done. I'll just be a mom. So I retired. I was a mom and a coach, and that's what I was doing in 2016.
Okay, yeah. And then 2016 comes along and you learn about your 2008 results where you finished 4th, but actually should have been given the bronze medal because someone had doped. And then from the 2012, you finished 3rd, but those 2 athletes in front of you had also failed a drugs test. So you upgraded from the bronze to the gold. So you actually were given an extra medal and then a completely different color as well. How did that feel, receiving your medals 6 years later, the true medals that you deserved?
Actually, I received the medal even later than that. So that summer of 2016, every few weeks, I received a message saying, hey, congrats, you upgraded a rank. And I'm like, what? It's so weird. I'm such in another world. I'm not an athlete anymore. I'm coaching, being a mom. But when I learned that my bronze was becoming silver and then gold, like it's a good thing, right? Like it's a great result that becomes even better. So you can't really be upset at having something that becomes even better. yes, sure, there's that what if I could have heard my song on the podium, my anthem. But it was still something good becoming great, and it felt good. But when I learned about my fourth place becoming bronze, that was really hard to take because of those 4 years that were so difficult for me, with no sponsors, like with not a lot of support, with my depression and the people saying that I failed. It was really those 4 years that could have been so different. If I had my bronze medal in Beijing when I deserved it, I would have been the first medalist for my country, for the whole Canada team, and the only one for 3 days. So just thinking about how much visibility this would have given me, and what kind of sponsorship that would have brought me, and what kind of support this would have brought me, it was really difficult to accept that I had that medal so much later, right?
Yeah. I can't imagine, how difficult when you consider that, when you say you were a 2 hours wait away from getting a bronze medal, and then to learn that those athletes had actually, cheated and doped to stop you from, achieving your goal potentially early in 2008. And I suppose you're fortunate in a way to have been given the medal and carry on competing. There's potentially other athletes who haven't been so lucky and are potentially retired in between, or just like we mentioned in the Charlie's video.
Yeah,
that's it. That was their one and only opportunity. They have to go get a job. They have to support for their family. And when we consider the team that you had around you, you were so fortunate in a way to have those people there for you.
that's right. And that's why when I was able to choose what kind of medal reallocation ceremony I wanted, it was important for me to have it in Canada. So just to let you know what happened is 2016, they asked me to put my medal in a box and mail it. So I had to mail my Olympic medal. And for 2 years, almost 2 years, until I received my new medals, I was like the future medalist of past Olympic. I had no Olympic medals, but I was supposed to have two. So it took a year and a half for me to have that ceremony to finally get what I deserved. So that was 10 years after Beijing and 6 years after London. So it was so long for as a delay. But at the same time, it was great because I was on the podium with my 3 kids, and I was like, this is amazing to be able to pass that down to them and include them in that ceremony. But yeah, it was quite a weird process.
No, absolutely. And, I think one of my final questions is sort of alludes to what we mentioned previously in terms of your values, but, some athletes may have just said, it is, I was that far away and I trained my heart out to get there. I'm going to start doping to just get the advantage, and especially in a sport that has quite a reputation where a lot of athletes are known to have doped. Again, what was the motivation factors just to say, I'm going to do this the right way?
Well, partly was to see the effect of doping on my competitor. I was able to see them year after year at the World Championship. And 1 year they have a bit of a mustache, the next year they have a whole beard, and the jaw and the voice. And I could see physically the change in their body that could not have been natural. And that was a very good stay away from for me, right? But I think the most important is really who I am as a person. This is so important for me. And I want to be proud of what I achieve. I never have been proud of what I achieve if I cheated. If I cheat in school and I have 100%, I don't feel proud of this, right? I want to hide it. So I didn't want to have to hide for my sport career. I wanted to be able to stand tall and be proud of what I achieved. And I think I can do that now, and that's why I'm here, right? So I can discuss my story.
No, I love that so much, and it really relates back to what we talked about last month with the emotions we experience when we put the hard work in, we do it clean, and you just think, this is what I did. So the pride, the happiness, there's no negative emotions, there's no regret, no shame. So honestly, thank you so much for sharing your story, Christine. It's been absolutely amazing to hear.
It's my pleasure. It's really it's important. And just to add on, I'm sorry if I can't, but I think when we talk about what we lost because of doping, it's important to talk about what my country lost as well, right? Like my whole country lost an occasion to celebrate in Beijing and in London, and what it would have as impact on the little kids doing sports and inspire them to be better and to keep chasing their dream. I think that's a very important part of what the cause of doping.
Yeah, no, in London 2012, it was all about legacy for our country. So, you know, your legacy is there now. It could have been there sooner for some other girls. So yeah, I completely agree with that. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I guess just, yeah, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for giving us that perspective, you know, in terms of your experience, but then the other people in your country that it affected as well. So I think now we would like to go to our second poll question, and this relates to prevalence, or how common situations like Christine's are or could be. And so the question is, between 2004 and 2018, how many medals awarded at the Olympic Games were part of the reanalysis program? And so your options are 0 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 150, 150 to 200, or over 200. So please jump on the poll and give us what your thoughts are. So perhaps to give you a bit of context around the reanalysis program while you're answering the poll. So this was initiated by the International Olympic Committee, and it was in order to provide a level playing field for all clean athletes through the reanalysis of stored samples. So samples stored during each edition of the Games since Athens 2004 have been stored for future reanalysis. And this can make sure that advantage can be taken of more sensitive or sophisticated detection methods, and also things like relevant intelligence that becomes available. And so it was put in place to, I guess, greatly increase the deterrent factor in the fight against doping. So that's a bit of background to the program. We can see from the poll results coming in that it's quite even. Maybe we'll just give another couple of seconds for last few of you to vote. And so I think now we can close the poll. So I think the biggest answer was over 200, but we can tell you that the exact number of medals which were part of the IOC reanalysis program between the period was 157. So that's 157 stories, potentially like Christine's. And so as I just kind of, I guess, referred to, is this number is just the medals which were part of the IOC reanalysis program. So the scale of medal reallocations is much larger when you take into account world and regional championship medals. And although we throw it out as a number, 157, it is important to remember that these are real people as well. And we have got some of the faces of these people who have been reallocated medals on the slides. And we have added links to their stories in the resources slide of this webinar, should you want to find out about their situations. And I think this links to something that Christine said as well, that this kind of the medal reallocation part is really the tip of the iceberg in terms of ripple effects. Like Christine talked about the effect on the children and the little girls within her country. So when we think about, you know, medal reanalysis, then we also have to think about the athletes who perhaps didn't quite make the final or even qualify for a championship because potentially qualifying standards were skewed and things like that. Phil, seeing all these faces on the screen, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think when you talk about, it's not just the medalists, it's the people who came, you know, to the final, to the semi-finals, even to the championships, all of that through. Sometimes I made teams by, you know, a hair length as I, you know, crossed the line. And imagine if I was to be beaten by someone who had doped and then didn't get a chance to get a GB vest, or he didn't get a chance to go to a competition because of someone else. You know, that's career changing for myself at that level, not just as an Olympic medal. So yeah, we call it the ripple effects of doping. It's not just one athlete, it's the athletes they beat and then the competitions that they're all involved in. So yeah, it's really, really poignant here.
And so I think, Phil, we have a video from Kelly Sotherton next. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about how you know Kelly and how your video with her came about.
Yeah, so we were very fortunate. So when this work was conducted at the University of Birmingham, Kelly was as local to the Birmingham area. And at the time, she'd been upgraded, like Christine, to Olympic bronze medals, Olympic silver medals as a heptathlete for Great Britain. And we managed to just have a quick interview with her, and she shared her story here about what it was like to be reallocated a medal, a few years later. So if we can watch the video and hear Kelly's story.
Why do you think competing clean is important, and what led you to this choice?
I have very strong values: integrity, fair play, honesty, transparency. That if you cut me open now, but you'd see those words inside me. And so I never started the sport thinking I'm going to cheat or want to cheat. I just thought I want to be the best I can possibly be. Never once has that entered my head. Never even thought about it, because it would never have been an option. We don't talk enough about somebody's values. Nobody starts off in sport thinking they're going to cheat. I certainly didn't. And so when I stand on a podium, I know I've got there through sheer determination and hard work, not just by myself, but from the family, the support, my coach, my physio, doctors, the support network around an athlete. Even when I knew there was a couple of competitors in my event that had been done for doping and they came back on after they served their ban, I still felt I could beat them because I was better than them. And so it never entered my mind, and I just thinking, why would I want to have that guilty feeling of knowing I didn't do it clean? As I said, I've never been in that situation. I've never really had to think about taking a drug. I mean, the worst thing I've probably ever done is taking a vitamin tablet. So it's like from, some Centrum or Boots, and even then I feel guilty. I'm taking a vitamin tablet, like, I'm taking a multivit. Ooh, that's cheating. It kind of is, because you should be getting all that from your food, but I've never thought ever about injecting myself or rubbing myself with a cream or taking a tablet or going to the doctor or finding or sourcing a coach who has a reputation for having dirty athletes. Never thought about it. Just thought I could do it with my own sheer talent and will, determination and hard work.
Yeah, I think it's fairly clear to see Kelly's values protruding through here in terms of the hard work she wants to show, the determination, making sure that, as just pretty much echoed what Christine was saying, that she wants to be able to stand on that podium and feel proud and happy that she did that for the right reasons. And there's no regret, there's no shame or guilt there. She also discussed the idea of her team around her as well, and how important that was for her. So we think about an athlete's team, even in individual sports, they have quite a number of people involved in the process.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to pick up on a point that Kelly just made in this video about no one starts out in sport to cheat. So maybe I'll throw this open to Phil, Christine. What are your thoughts? How does someone get there? How does someone get from, Christine, how you mentioned your start in sport, it was all about health, it was all about moving your body. So yeah, Phil, Christine, anyone want to contribute anything in the chat with us about, what changes, what happens?
It's a good question, because just like Kelly, I don't think that was ever a question for me, right? But another thing I share with Kelly was the entourage and the culture and the values that we grew up in, right? So having those values don't just happen by itself. It's probably from her parents and her family that she grew into, and it became just not a question for her. So I think that's what needs to be promoted, and maybe the athlete that does that decision or take that decision to cheat, they need maybe to learn different concepts or values or apply them in a different way. That's what I would say. What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think of my sport, I just loved it. I just enjoyed it. I loved the people in it. I loved the training process. And, you know, I got involved in sport because of that enjoyment. And I can't imagine going down the line where I think I have to take something, I have to inject something, because then where's the enjoyment, I suppose, in that? What is the reasons for doing it? So just to echo again Kelly's point here, you know, you never start out in your career, anyone's career, that I'm going to go and dope. You do because you love the sport. So yeah, that's how I would sum that up.
So thank you both for sharing your thoughts very briefly on that. I mean, obviously, this is a much bigger conversation than, you know, 2 minutes as part of a webinar, but it was certainly interesting to hear your thoughts. So far, we have covered the consequences of doping for other athletes, such as Christine. But there are consequences perhaps closer to home for an athlete who dopes or is sanctioned for an anti-doping rule violation. In last month's webinar, when we covered the impact of doping on emotions, we did have a question from a participant at the end about whether negative emotions such as guilt and shame would still be present if doping was inadvertent or unintentional. So maybe, for example, they used a contaminated supplement. And of course, it is difficult to make a generalized statement on this. But I think whenever there is an anti-doping rule violation, there will be negative impacts on emotions for the athlete, but also those around them. And we've listed some of these groups of people around the athlete, and feel free to add any other athlete support personnel in the chat box who we've missed on this slide, but who could be affected if an athlete is doping. So we think maybe the coach, family, friends, doctor, a team manager, maybe the agent, physiotherapist, maybe your massage therapist. I mean, it gets quite wide, I think, of the people that are affected. And Phil, maybe I'll hand over to you for your comments. And I know you've got a bit of a, I guess, reflection activity for us to do as well.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to what we mentioned with Christine earlier, is that even if you're in an individual sport, there are, you know, potentially 3, 5, 10 people who are there supporting you. So the circle is pretty large. In terms of the reflection activity, yeah, what I would like people in the chat box to do, if you're here, just think about you're an athlete, or if you're a coach, a physio, a doctor, they're competing in a major championship. They're training very hard, competing clean, and you suspect the first 3 athletes who win a medal in that competition have doped. Now, how would you feel as the athlete or as the support personnel to the athlete who has competed clean? How do you think you would feel in that situation? So feel free to write this in the chat box of your emotions. And I think this might be something potentially for Nikki and Christine. How would you feel in this situation?
So I guess from my career, from my perspective, so I was a track and field athlete in 1500 meters, so quite a high risk sport in terms of susceptibility to doping. And I think when it comes to suspicions or, you know, thinking about what other athletes are doing, throughout my career, I tried to be quite optimistic about it and take it at face value, because I think at some point, like if you think everyone around you is doping, it can lead you perhaps a couple of ways. I mean, one, it might justify moving more into the grey zone yourself in terms of what you do and your behaviours, because maybe that's what you think you might have to do to keep up. But also, it's either that or, you know, how would you go on competing if you thought you never had a chance? So I guess for me, it was to try and be optimistic and not really think about others too much, because I think it would just steal your joy from sport. And for me, I mean, the joy of running, and Phil, you would experience this as well, and probably Christine, you know, when you lift that bar up and it's just the perfect lift, you know, when you have a perfect race, you know, that feeling is unmatched. And it's not, I guess, really about winning. It's about the process and focusing on yourself and what you can do to control that.
That's a very good point, because that's what I would have said is, being in a targeted sport, I competed against people that ended up testing positive, and I had beat them at the competition. It happened many times in my career, and to see that helped me focus more on me. The only thing I could do in this environment was to show the world that you can be that level while staying true to yourself and staying like promoting integrity and honesty and transparency, like Kelly mentioned. So it helped me focus on what I could do, and my goal was to push my limits as far as I could. So that was my way. I always said that's my way of promoting clean sport, is to push my limits and focus on myself and focus on my performance. So yes, when you look at, let's say, look at my result at the World Championship, I'll never know how good I was at the Worlds, because so many countries were doped. We know now that because of retesting, and so many teams got caught. But it doesn't really matter, because when I was there, I was focusing on myself. It was me that I was trying to beat. And I think that was what helped me went through this phase of my life.
Amazing. No, really like that. And I can see some of the comments in the chat box. You know, Maria says she would be disheartened. You got to feel dissatisfied, disappointed, and helpless. Same comments here with being disappointed and quite angry. So I think these are really highlighting the consequences for others. And the consequences for others are, you are stopping someone potentially of achieving their own personal a goal that they could have had in terms of a medal or a competition. So the consequences for doping aren't just with the athlete who dopes, it is for these other competitors as well. And I think we've got to have a one last video that we'll be going through in terms of the consequences that doping has for the family members. And we have a video on our next slide. Yeah, perfect. So just to introduce you to this video, this is an athlete called Adam, and he was a rugby player. What he had done, he'd taken a sports supplement which had been contaminated with a banned substance. While it isn't an intentional doping, what this video is going to highlight is the consequence that this has for him, but also for his parent and his dad. So I think this really highlights the unintentional doping, which has been sponsored by Informed Sport, these sessions. So the consequences for unintentional and intentional doping can have on the on that. So we thank You Can't You Doping for letting us use this video. And what I'd like you to think about is how the dad felt during this scenario.
I started playing rugby when I was 8 years old. I started playing at Chester Rugby Club, which is my local club. By the time I was about 12, people started realising that I had an interest in rugby and that I was actually quite good at rugby. And like I say, that's when I really fell in love with it, when I was about 12 years old. Played it week in, week out, just loved it. And yeah, never ever thought I'd get selected for England. Always wanted to, never thought I actually would. But yeah, I did. Got selected for England, represented England on 4 occasions. Fantastic. It was fantastic. Best time of my life, like, really was the best time of my life. Until I got drugs test results back, obviously. Broke my heart, like, just absolutely annihilated me.
It was, you know, shot a complete bolt out of the blue, and it was pretty earth-shattering. And the only way I can explain it, it's like almost having a death in the family. You know, even now, I struggle with him.
So very, very visible to see from the father here that his son playing at such a high level and him to have failed a drugs test. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. I'll go to the next slide, Nikki. I don't know if you were going to mention anything in terms of your parents and also if Christine's there and how they might have felt if you'd have failed a drugs test.
Yeah, to be honest, I can't even imagine. Like, I mean, how do you even have that conversation? I wouldn't know where to start. I would be so ashamed. I would be so embarrassed. Christine, I don't know if you feel similar.
Yes, exactly. I can't even picture that. I can't picture that talk with my parents. I mean, I am an extension of their values, right? So obviously it would hurt me as much as it would hurt them. And that would add on to my shame and my guilt, right? To see that effect on them. I can't imagine.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think of the same. My dad was my biggest fan. He was the one waking up in the early morning to take me to my competitions, to take me to my training sessions, my financial support from the age of 16 all the way up until I was getting a job myself. So they're invested in much of your success as you are. So I think that is a really clear example of the consequences doping can have, not just for yourself, but for other people. And this leads on to our recent case with the Robinson brothers and the recent case of what just happened. I don't know if we have the slide available, just to go through how Jake felt. So recently we have a case here of Jake Robinson, and his brother had failed a drugs test, and you can see here through some of the comments that he's feeling of his actual brother now who's failed a drugs test, and saying that his family have a great amount of anguish, also financial loss. So we talk about the health consequences, but this is, financial implications, social implications. It was frustrating for him, infuriating, and due to the fact that he wasn't at fault, these are the actions of his own twin brother for having this. So it may even have the effect now when we start looking at Jake and think, no, well, your brother was doping, you must have been doing it as well. So this is going to really play into them too here in terms of the consequence that it has for someone so close to him. We have a couple of other examples in terms of the impact that doping can have on people's family. Probably the most famous person when we consider those who have been found to have doped is Lance Armstrong. Even he says the effects of being labeled a doper is it's caused his son and his daughter to be bullied at school. So with the interview that he's done, he's mentioned that it got quite ugly at school for his kids. They even believed in him so much. So they were believing his dad was the greatest cyclist of all time. And then they were promoting him at school to then be found out that actually, no, he was doping all along. So a lot of his kids were getting bullied because of that. And now he's in this position where he has to say, look, you can't defend me. I am that person who did dope. So the consequences, even for someone like Lance Armstrong, are very clear. And then when we consider teammates, there's even implications for those athletes who are part of the same team. And what happened recently with Great Britain at the Tokyo Olympic Games was that the Great Britain team had won a silver medal in the 4x100 meter relay. And CJ Ujar, who's kneeling down there, had taken a supplement which was then contaminated, and because of that, he failed a drugs test, and all of his teammates had failed a drugs test. And Richard Kilty, the person to the left of CJ there on the picture, you know, mentions it that it was the pinnacle for him. That was his only Olympic medal, and he trained for around about 15 years and flat out even 20 years to get to this pinnacle of his career. And then he said to lose it because one person has just been sloppy and reckless is heartbreaking. And I can't imagine it for, you know, myself to lose out on some of my greatest achievements because of someone else. I don't know how you would feel, Christine, Nikki, for something similar as well. It would be absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It would be very hard that you lose your biggest result of your life through no control of your own.
Yeah.
So perhaps thank you, Phil, for taking us through those case studies. So perhaps you would like to now summarize our session today.
Yeah, so I suppose just to summarize some of the main points that we've discovered is that doping has consequences for these athletes. For those athletes that have, you know, worked hard, competed clean, just as Christine alluded to right at the beginning, you know, the values, the integrity, those athletes are the ones who are, you know, have the consequences laid onto them. So doping isn't just about, it's not a selfless act. It is related to, or has those ripple effects to everybody else. It has consequences for other people's emotions. And we, even in the chat box, you mentioned things about being angry, disheartened, saddened. These are the emotions that you'll experience potentially through other person doping. Their livelihood as well. So we consider the financial implications. Christine discussed how for 4 years she had to pretty much train and compete on a shoestring budget. She had the support of her family there, so that was probably a very difficult time where she mentioned she was quite depressed, a lot of expectations and pressure. So it is really, really difficult. So doping isn't that selfless act, and it can have implications for other athletes who you compete against, your teammates who you're actually with, having the same success with, and then your family who are so close to you, who've supported you from such a young age all the way through your career. They're also implicated in it as well.
Yeah, so thank you, Phil, for that summary. And perhaps just to, for me to give a quick summary of the two parts of this webinar. So it is clear, I think, that doping has many consequences on emotions, which we discussed last month in part 1. And today in part 2, we talked about these consequences on others. So other athletes such as Christine, the sport, those close to an athlete. And I think an important message is that these consequences are long term, and we don't really know how far they go. And these aren't just going to stop or go away when a ban from sport or another sanction ends. Perhaps just very briefly before we do go to our Q&A, because I do see a question in there. Christine, is there a key message you would like to share with our webinar participants today?
Well, I think you both summarized the subject of the webinar really well. I think what I would like to say, maybe it's the opposite. We talked about the ripple effect of doping, but there's also such thing as the ripple effect of not doping and promoting clean sport and being able to achieve high results while staying true to our values. And the more we have athletes that will follow this path, the more that the next generation will see it and will want to do the same. So I just want, if there's athlete coaches here, please continue to be clean and be promoting those values and stay true to yourself, because you are the reason why the next generation will have a cleaner sport. So that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you so much, Christine, and what a lovely way to end, and a lovely way to end on a positive note. So before we do go to our Q&A, you can see on your screen we've linked some resources related to the content of this webinar, and also some more athlete stories which you may be interested in looking at after the session. So I do see one question in our Q&A, and it's from Karen. And Karen says, good morning. When one player in a team sport has an AAF, for example in hockey, does the entire team lose their medals? So I know that consequences in terms of teams are slightly different depending on which sport you're involved in, and it would explain the exact consequences in the sport anti-doping rules. What I would say is I think as teammates, you have to hold each other accountable. You have to be able to trust in each other. I mean, we had the example of CJ Uja and the other 3 athletes that lost their Olympic medals. So I think that would be my key message, is not really be able to answer your question because it's quite sport specific, but that as teammates, we should all be responsible, we should all be respectful and make sure we're working within the rules to not have effects on our teammates who have worked just as hard as perhaps we have.
Yeah, just to jump in there, Nikki, I've just pulled up the World Anti-Doping Code, and it does say if two members in a team sport have found to have doped, then the whole team is sanctioned. So it does have consequences for those team sport athletes.
Awesome, thank you, Phil. And so that comes to the end of our time with you today. If you still do have questions, or if anything wasn't answered, you can always reach us at education@ita.sport. A big thank you to our panelists, Phil and Christine, and of course, a big thank you to you, our audience, for your attention and participation. So quickly for this session, in addition to the survey, the University of Birmingham is working to improve clean sport education. The university would like to conduct interviews with up to 15 people to inform the improvement of content and the development of clean sport activities. If you're interested, please email values.uob@gmail.com. And finally, if you would like to receive updates from the ITA, including information about our upcoming webinars, for example, please sign up using the link you will find on this slide. And so thank you all once again. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Christine. I wish everyone a great rest of your day.